Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jack Craig. It's great to be back with you this afternoon. And being more than frank, I will tell you I'm so happy to be here and have you singing with me because it gets me out of doing the yard work at home. So I'm ecstatic to be here. And we're going to take a look this afternoon at what was happening in the very middle of the 1930s. With music in particular, but the harshness of the Depression was still in place to an extent, although maybe it was easing a little bit. And one of the interesting things musicologists think about, and you may not have thought this way, but when the going gets rough in our culture, the music gets going. Do you hear what I just said? Yes. So it shouldn't surprise you that during World War I, there were hundreds of popular songs coming forward, many to do with the war and many not to do with the war. And I'm not saying that the Roaring Twenties didn't have good music, it had great music. But then when the Depression hit, music thrived, and then during World War II, music thrived again. So I'm beginning to think that we, in our culture, when the going gets tough, sometimes maybe we use music as a little bit of escapism. Like in the 1930s, in the harshness of the Depression, you had some of the greatest writers. You had Cole Porter, you had the Gershwin brothers, you had Jerome Kern. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And they were very productive during that era. We had movies with music, which were the new kids on the block. The first one of those was 1927 when Al Jolson sang in the Jazz Singer. So movies with music were popular, and then we had the explosion of interest in dancing, the so-called swing era, or you could call it whatever you'd like. Dance band era, swing era, big band era, call it whatever you might. We had that, and then everything was getting rolled up into one. We had Broadway shows with dance music in them. We had big, beautiful radios where you could spin the dial and listen to a dance band from a broadcast site. And if you could afford the 10 or 15 cents, which I believe was the price for the movie during the Depression, you could actually go out and see Fred and Ginger dancing in movies. You know who I'm talking about, right? Fred Astaire. I know I'm preaching to the choir. So you might expect this program to have a wonderful mix along the lines of what I was just saying. I see a few new friends here today. Remember, whenever I'm here, it's not a concert, it's an audience participation event. You're invited to be singing along. I accept singing by any definition you wish to give it. And that may be the bad news for the person in front of you or beside you. I don't know. Having said that, I want to call your attention to song number 1 in your book, April in Paris. This song is really two things rolled into one for me. Number one, it was one of my favorite Duke Ellington recordings. So Duke Ellington had a spectacular dance band version of April in Paris. I love it. I also want you to note, though, the two names that are underneath it. In 1932, Vernon Duke was a new kid on the block in songwriting. His real name was Vladimir Dukelski. He had immigrated from Russia, and he was well known there as a classical composer. When he stepped off the boat in New York, he was greeted by George Gershwin, the proud son of Russian immigrants to the United States. He took Vladimir under his wing and said, you can't write with that name and you got to learn how to write a pop song. Even though you like classical music, you're not going to make much money doing that. And he partnered with E.Y. Harburg. You may not know Edmund Yip Harburg by name, but if I told you a little bit later in the 30s he would write all the music for The Wizard of Oz, including Over the Rainbow, you will know many of his songs, and this would be one. Yip Harburg was a high school classmate of Ira Gershwin's. So I call this song the Gershwin Connection song. Ira writing for the school newspaper in high school, and then this other writer, Vladimir Dukelski, became Vernon Duke, mentored by George Gershwin. So a lot of wonderful connections. and we get going with a great dancing song. April in Paris, chestnuts in blossom, holiday days under the trees. April in Paris, this is a feeling no one can ever replace. I never knew the charm of spring, never knew a face to face. I never knew my heart could sing, never missed a warm embrace till April in Paris. Who can I run to? What have you done to my heart? Dorothy Fields and Jimmy McHugh were at year 4 of their combined effort in songwriting. Both of them were Massachusetts kids. Dorothy Fields started as a teacher of theater in the Boston public school system, but went to New York because she so loved writing lyrics for songs. And then her friend, Jimmy McHugh, was from a place that some of my friends call Dorchester. Anybody know where Dorchester is? I better say Dorchester before someone gets angry. So they both were from Massachusetts, but both down in New York, and prolific from their early days. Do you remember I Can't Give You Anything? Sorry, it's not in the program. That was an early great hit. Here comes a little breakup song in 1932. Don't Blame Me is the title of number 2. Don't blame me for falling in love with you. I'm honest, how can I help it? Don't blame me. Can't you see when you do the things you do? If I can conceive, feel that I'm feeling, don't blame me. I can't help it if that woman makes me think of someone like you to love. Blame your kiss, as sweet as a kiss can be. And blame all your charms that melt in my arms, but don't blame me. So I don't know whether they were falling in love or falling out of love, but it was a pretty cute song. Irving Berlin had actually written song number 3 7 years earlier in 1925 when he was on his honeymoon. He had married that year Ellen Mackay, and they honeymooned taking a steamship to England and back. And he wrote a couple of songs while he was on that honeymoon. One was called Blue Skies. You ever heard of that one? And then he wrote this one. So you got to imagine Irving and Ellen arm in arm, leaning on the railing of the steamship, and Irving does this. What does he write? How deep is the ocean? You see, Irving Berlin never went to school officially beyond the 3rd grade. And for all of his thousands of songs, he tended to write what was right in front of him. So on the same honeymoon, he must have done this. And that's why he wrote Blue Skies. And then the next day, maybe it was a little cloudy, and he did this. By the way, I have asked that question and gotten some interesting answers. I noticed all of you were quite polite when he was doing this. So, how deep is the ocean? How much do I love you? I'll tell you no more. How deep is the ocean? How high is the sky? How many times a day do I think of you? How many roses are sprinkled with you? How far will I travel to be where you are? you can see how we're covering a lot of ground in a short amount of time here. Little Jack Little, one of the names you see under number 4, was also a dance band leader. And this song, in fact, is a pretty little waltz. There weren't as many waltzes during the swing eras, but there were some cute ones. But really, if you go right to the lyrics of this song, you can kind of sense the Depression era connection, right? It's only a shanty in old shanty town, right? So other songs of the Depression, like Just Picture a Penthouse Way Up in the Sky. People couldn't afford it, so the just picture it was important, right? So here we go with a beautiful little dancing song, smack dab from 1932. It's only a shanty in old shanty town. The road is so slightly, it touches the ground. But my tongue will not shine by an old railroad track, like a millionaire's mansion is calling me down. I'd give up the palace if I were a king. It's more than a palace, it's my everything. There's a queen waiting there with a silver ring crown, in a shanty, in old shanty town. For 3 years, Ted Koehler and Harold Arlen were, you might say, exclusive songwriters for a very significant place called the Cotton Club. If you wanted in the New York area a good night's dancing, hearing a great band, great singers, entertainment, and a bit of a floor show, the Cotton Club was the place to go. Koehler and Arlen were writing 90% of the songs for their shows, including this cute little number from number 5 from 1932. I've got the world on a string. I got the world on a string, sitting on the rainbow, got the string around my finger. What a life, I'm in love. I got a song that I sing, I can make the rainbow anytime I move my finger. Lucky me, can't you see? I'm in love. Life's a beautiful thing, as long as I hold the string. I'd be a silly soul and soul if I should ever let go. I got the world on a string, sitting on a rainbow, got the string around my finger. What a world, what a life, I'm in love. Rodgers and Hart had been writing together since the early 1920s. A little bit of a history lesson. In 1917, Richard Rodgers, Larry Hart, and Oscar Hammerstein were all schoolmates at Columbia University. And I don't know why the choice was for Rodgers to write with Hart first, but he did. And did so for 22 and a half years. By the 1930s, it was full steam ahead for Rodgers and Hart. Some other afternoon, I'll bring you just their story and we'll sing a lot of their glorious songs. Here's one of them. In 1932, they wrote for a little production called Love Me Tonight. And this gets me to the point where in the 1930s, because of the Depression, Broadway musicals were very costly things to do. And although Rodgers and Hart's preference would be to write for Broadway, they, like all other writers in the 30s, would take opportunities to write for Hollywood. There were more opportunities for songwriters writing for these new movies with music, etc. So in the movie Love Me Tonight, which featured Jeanette MacDonald, and do you want to guess who her co-star was? I set you up on that one because it wasn't Nelson Eddy. Aha! I gotcha. Gotcha. You gotta watch out. I was a teacher for 35 years. You had to put a trick question on every test, so the best student in the class couldn't get 100. Well, they might still get 100, the really sharp ones, at least where I taught. But the co-star for Jeanette MacDonald was Maurice Chevalier. And the number was Lover, a rather dramatic little number here. Lover, I need you, and I hear you speak my name. Softly in my ear, you breathe the flame. Lover, when we're dancing, keep the light sinking in my eyes. There lots of entrancing music dies. All of my future is in you. Your every plan I design. Promise you'll always continue to be mine. Lover, please be tender when you're tender, please decline. Lover, I surrender in my heart. You can even hear in the lyrics what I was saying in the introduction about the mix taking place, a movie and a dancing song. So you get right in the song, Lover, when we're dancing, keep on glancing in my eyes, till love's own entrancing music dies. So it worked in the movie, but then any dance band leader who wanted to could pick it up and play it as dance. I hope you know the name Cole Porter. He'd been well underway since the late 20s. We owe Irving Berlin a thank you note for nudging Cole Porter into getting his songs published. Cole Porter was writing songs and throwing them in a wastebasket, thinking they weren't any good. And when Irving Berlin heard a few of them, he said, Cole, you got to publish. You're good. So from the late 20s coming forward, boy, were we lucky until the mid-1950s. In 1932, Cole was writing then first for a musical. I repeat, for a stage musical called Gay Divorce. I call that an interesting contrast in terms, right? Gay meaning happy at that time in 1932, right? So a happy divorce, well maybe for some it is, right? A happy one. Anyway, that was the show. And on the Broadway stage was Fred Astaire. Be careful. Remember the tricky thing? Who was he dancing with? Quietly, people are saying Ginger Rogers, and we're almost there. But he wasn't dancing with her yet, and he wasn't dancing, good for you for even knowing his sister Adele. He had just finished dancing with Adele. All right, you're going to get the Fred Astaire story. In 1905, Mama Austerlitz, which was the family's last name, from the Midwest, brought her two kids, Fred and Adele, to New York at ages 6 and 8. And they danced exclusively together as brother and sister until the very early 30s. And then his sister, Adele, got an offer for marriage from an honest-to-goodness prince in Europe. She married him, went and lived in a castle. Fred needed to find new dancing buddies. Now, for this show, he danced, because I'm making a big deal out of this story, you'll see why. For this show, Gay Divorce, he danced on stage with Claire Luce. Then the show was made into a movie. And when the show got made into a movie, they asked Fred if he'd reprise his role, and he said yes. And now, go ahead, who did he dance with in the movie? Ginger Rogers. Okay, now we've got that whole story woven together, so you've got your dots connected. Cole Porter was sitting on a beach in Newport, Rhode Island, visiting friends who owned one of the mansions there. Cole would go up and hang out for the weekend, and sitting on a beach, he came up with this. The two names under number 8 were primarily movie writers. You knew Broadway songwriters' names better because they were on the marquees and the playbills and the advertising posters outside the theater. You didn't know movie songwriter names unless you had really good eyesight when those credits went by at the end of the movie or the beginning. And even then, the songwriter's name might be in smaller print than the title of the song. But you knew their songs. It won't surprise me if you know this song. In 1932, it was in a little movie called The Big Broadcast. And then sung by Bing Crosby. That might be another reason why you might know this. Please, let me little into my place. Let the rain into my peace. Tell me that you love me too. Please, let me hold you tight in my arms. I could find the light in your charms. Every night my whole life through. Your eyes reveal that you have the soul of an angel white as snow. But how long must I play the role of a gloomy, wrongy heart? Oh, please, say the love you can't make to tease. Speak the happy ending at peace. Tell me that you love me true. In number 9, I'm taking us back now again to the age of operetta. And Jerome Kern was one of the principal songwriters who would be capable of writing both American operetta and American pop songs. He was doing that when he and Oscar Hammerstein, 5 years earlier in 1927, wrote Showboat. At the beginning of the production, you heard an operetta-like song, We Could Make Believe I Love You. And then later on in the same show, you were singing, Fish Gotta Swim and Birds Gotta Fly. A good little pop song. So here they are partnered again. 5 years went by. They didn't write every year, Kern and Hammerstein, as Rodgers and Hart were. 5 years went by. They wrote For Music in the Air in 1932, and a beautiful little operetta-like song. Jerome Kern wasn't ready to give up on this kind of melodic, sweeping line yet. I hear music when I look at you. A beautiful theme of every dream I ever knew. Down deep in my heart, I hear it play. I feel it start and melt away. I hear music when I touch your hand. A beautiful melody from some enchanted land. Down deep in my heart, I hear it say, is this the day? I alone have heard this lovely strain. I alone have heard this lovely refrain. Must it be forever inside of me? Why can't I let it go? Why can't I let you go? Why can't I let you know the song my heart would sing? That beautiful rhapsody of love and youth and spring. The music is sweet, the words are true, the song is you. I'll give you an extra tidbit. And I think, some people would smile if I say, what I'm going to give you a tidbit on could be considered the height of arrogance. But if your name was Jerome Kern, and you and Oscar Hammerstein had written Showboat, you deserved that kind of feeling. Having said that, there is a uniqueness to the title and lyrics of that song. Did anybody happen to spot it? I love disclosing it. What's the title? Where do you sing it? The last 4 words of the song. I hope you realize that 99% of other songs you would name for me in the American Songbook, the title will be in the first phrase. If not even 5 foot 2, eyes of or I'm in the mood for love. So in a way, it's kind of the height of arrogance to know that you're so good as a songwriter, people are going to love your song. And you can wait until the very end to put the lyrics there of the title. If you want to, you can take a moment to refer to the front cover of your booklet. Our next song, number 10, came in 1933 from a movie, and that movie was called Sitting Pretty. And there you have a sheet music cover for the song, Did You Ever See a Dream Walking? By the way, Gladys Turner, that name written under it, that was the woman whose sheet music it was. And it was a wonderful habit in the 1900s, if you got a piece of sheet music, to write your name on it, and it does not in any way devalue the sheet music. But anyway, back on topic. Look at the line of notes diagonally across the music. What's above that line? Dancing feet. Then the line of music. Then 3 people ostensibly dancing. Then the pictures of the stars, Jack Oakey, Ginger Rogers, and Jack Haley. And the fact that it was a Paramount picture. So again, you get it all wrapped up into one. Did you ever see a dream walking coming from a movie but becoming one of the popular dancing songs of the 30s? Did you ever see a dream walking? Well, I did. Did you ever hear a dream walking? Well, I did. Did you ever have a dream thrill you? With will you become? Oh, it's so grand, and it's good to dream on. Did you ever see a dream dancing? Well, I did. Did you ever see a dream romancing? I did. Did you ever find heaven right in your arms, saying I love you, I do? Well, the dream that was walking, and the dream that was talking, and the heaven in my arms is you. Irving Berlin, writing for a show in 1933, that musical on stage called As Thousands Cheer. You probably know songs from that show, even though you may not have seen it. Every scene in that stage musical represented a section of the newspaper. And Irving Berlin needed to come up with songs for the variety of sections. So there was a weather section of the newspaper. Anybody know what Irving wrote for that one? We're having a heat wave, a tropical heat wave. And then there was the rotogravure section, the kind of society pages, and Irving Berlin and his wife Ellen were actually participants in that, famous millionaires by now. And when he and Ellen would go out for a walk, the photographers will snap us. And you'll find that you're in the... I'm preaching to the choir. But you see, once again, Irving was writing about himself. I told you that before. Didn't go to school beyond the 3rd grade, so he says, I can write whatever I want. And he did. I think you probably know this. In your Easter bonnet, with all the rims on it, you'll be a bride taking Easter already. I'll be rolling over, and when they look you over, I'll be a bride telling you Easter already. On the afternoon, minutes ago I mentioned a movie called The Big Broadcast. Now I'm going to mention a movie called The Gold Diggers. Both of those, the Big Broadcast series of movies and the Gold Diggers series of movies, came into being primarily because of Florence Ziegfeld. Ziegfeld in 1906 had this great idea. Do a different show every year, but give it the same name. And if people like it, they'll keep coming back and coming back and coming back. So the Ziegfeld Follies were put in place. And they were still in place until the early 30s, also sadly. Ziegfeld himself is just about to pass at the time of this particular year that we're covering in our program. But having said that, movie makers saw Ziegfeld's business plan and said, hey, that's a good idea. We'll do the Gold Diggers of 1933, we'll do the Gold Diggers of 1934, we'll do the Gold Diggers of 1935. A couple minutes ago we sang a song from the Big Broadcast of 1932. Bob Hope made his film debut in the Big Broadcast of 1937. They were still making those then. So here we go with a typical, cute little, I call it, Depression song. We're in the money. Do you think many people were? Nope. But you'll get the humor, I think, of the song as we sing this great Al Dubin and Harry Warren song. By the way, Dubin and Warren were multiple Academy Award-winning songwriters. Again, you may not know their name, but they were good. Did not apply to too many people. I Cover the Waterfront, a beautifully different piece of music, has the name Johnny Green under the right-hand side. I want to call your attention to him. He was a wonderful musician. He actually at one time had his own band, but he also was an arranger for significant band leaders. Do you remember the name Guy Lombardo? Okay. So Lombardo was active with his band in the 30s. Johnny Green would write arrangements for dance band leaders, but he also would create beautiful music. And I put this song in principally because it's uniquely pretty. It's different in some ways melodically from others we've done in the program. Again, this time partnering with Harold Arlen. And again, in 38, they'll write the score for The Wizard of Oz. But in 1933, they wrote this for a little stage musical. So noticing, we're getting a mix today of stage musicals and movie musicals. And that was really the mainstream of what was happening with music in the 1930s. This one, really cute. We're going to sing late in the song, it's a Barnum and Bailey world. Well, sadly, not anymore. When was the last Barnum and Bailey performance? Just within the year. Barnum and Bailey finally finished an amazing entry into the American annals of our culture was circus. But circuses were really big in the 1930s. So I could expand on that. I don't think I will right now. I'll simply tell you that was partly what Billy Rose and Yip Harburg had in mind with this. Say it's only a paper moon, sailing over a cardboard sea. Why would you make me leave if you believe in me? Yes, it's only a canvas star hanging over a muslin tree. Why would you make me leave if you believe in me? Without your love, it's a honky-tonk parade. Without your love, it's a melody played in a penny arcade. It's a part of my daily work, just as lonely as it can be. Why would you make me leave if you believe in me? Back to the world of dance bands and a beautiful song, It's the Talk of the Town. If I mentioned a dance band leader by the name of Glenn Gray, do you recognize it?
Yeah.
Could you finish this for me? Glenn Gray and his Casa Loma Orchestra, good for you. I don't, where did that come from? Over here somewhere. Okay. Gold star to the person in the front row here. Glenn Gray gained the name of his band from an unfortunate event in 1927 when he was supposed to play at a big venue up in Canada because the Prince of England was coming. And on the way, the Prince fell and broke his ankle and didn't complete the trip. So Glenn Gray didn't get to premiere the opening of the so-called Casa Loma, a big performance venue up in Canada. But he kept the name associated with his dance band, and boy, here's a good little breakup sound. I smile every time I sing this song. I'm not going to get too personal with you, but I'm going to tell you I grew up in a beautiful small town. Everybody in town knew everybody else's business. Perfect for this. I can't show my face, can't go any place. People stop and stare. It's so hard to bear. Everybody knows you left me. It's the talk of the town. Every time we meet, my heart skips a beat. We don't stop to speak. Oh, it's just a week. Everybody knows you left me. It's the talk of the town. We send out invitations to games and traditions, announcing our wedding day. Friends and relations gave congratulations on her new face. And what can we say? Let's take up sweetheart. We can't stand by. Don't let foolish pride keep you from my side. Nothing all the cars we can get. It's the talk of the town. Song number 16 has an interesting backstory. Jerome Kern wrote the music for number 16 as a march for a radio commercial. It's ugly. And when Jerome and Otto Harbach were writing for a movie called Roberta, Otto had said to Jerome, you know that ugly march you wrote for the radio commercial? Let's slow it down and I'll put some pretty words to it. And I think people will like it. And the ugly march became this. They asked me how I knew my true love was true. I of course replied, something you inside cannot be denied. They said someday we'll find on the vocal side at the Cotton Club in 1933 was Ethel Waters. She would premiere Stormy Weather, and it was a beautiful bluesy song, both a little bit of a relationship song, but also a metaphor for the Depression. Life is bare, gloom and misery everywhere, stormy weather. Don't know why, there's no sun in the sky, sunny weather. Since time and lying together, it keeps raining all the time. Life is bare, gloom and mystery everywhere, sunny weather. Just can't get myself together. I'm weary all the time. So weary all the time. When you went away, the moons were blue and empty. If we stay away, we'll rock the chair, look at me. All I do is pray the Lord above will let me walk in the sun once more. And go on, everything I was taught, sunny weather. Since time and lying together, keeps raining all the time. Keeps raining all the time. Cole Porter was contracted to write for a musical, and the musical was to be called Bon Voyage. And that musical was to be about having fun on a cruise ship. It had a beautiful cast, and then in real life, off the coast of New York and New Jersey, a ship called the SS Castle caught fire, listed, and sank. It was a loss of life. It was a horrible tragedy. Any former New Yorkers here? You remember hearing about it? It was horrible. And they couldn't make a show on Broadway about having fun on a cruise ship when that happened in real life. So they had a meeting and they brought in Cole. He was supposed to be writing, and the producer and the director said, look, we're going to change the title, we're changing the story, and Cole, take out the cruise ship songs and write us a couple of new songs. Cole said, well, what do you want me to write about? The director said, I don't care, anything goes. About 2 days later, Cole Porter came back with this, and it was so much appreciated, it became the revised title of the musical, not just a song in it. The fact that because of the swing era, as it was so called, we got wonderful other kinds of music in the American songbook. From south of the border, we got Latin dances, the samba, the mambo, the cha-cha, the beguine, the merengue, coming in as part of the swing era. From the middle of Europe, we got polkas. They had originated there. They were most popular and commonly used, sometimes in conjunctions with beer fests. So Jaromir Vejvoda, a Middle European man, wrote this Czechoslovakian polka under the title Škorolaski. But we weren't familiar with that language, so we gave it these words. Roll on the barrel, we'll have the barrel. and Hart had a unique song in their songbook, and it's this next one. Although they thought it might get used in a particular movie, it didn't. They had written this song, the exact music that you and I are about to sing, with one set of lyrics and did nothing with it. Then Larry Hart put a second set of lyrics to it, same music, did nothing with it. Then Larry Hart put a third set of lyrics to it, did nothing with it. And then they put a fourth set of lyrics to it that you and I are about to sing. And boy, did it go places. But it was not in a Rodgers and Hart musical, and it was not in a Rodgers and Hart soundtrack for a movie. It's the rarity in the Rodgers and Hart songbook. It was a standalone hit, but every dance band in America latched on to it. Wrote the music for number 21 first only as a broad sweeping piano piece. Something like and then friends said, that music's so pretty, it's got to have words. So Mitchell Parrish added words to it. And a band leader by the name of Larry Clinton had a singer by the name of B. Wayne. And they recorded it, and wow, did people like it. When the deep river falls over the sleepy garden walls, and the stars begin to flicker in the sky, through the mist of a memory, you'll wander back to me, breathing my name with a song. In the still of the night, once again our hope is right, for your wonder lives on when the light beams. And as long as my heart will beat, lover will always be here in my dream, purple dreams. Fred Coots and Sam Lewis brought For All We Know forward in 1934. It was just really a beautiful standalone love song. So not a big name show, not a big name movie. Many different singers would perform it because it was so beautiful. For all we know, we may never meet again. Before you go, make this moment sweet again. We won't say goodnight until the last winter. I'll hold up my hand and my heart will be in the to get song number 23 by Cole Porter banned from being played on the radio. They didn't want you young kids hearing about champagne and alcohol and a kick from cocaine. Oh dear, I guess there were some temptations around in the 1930s, just like they're present today. But guess what? The parents weren't successful. People like Cole Porter's music so much they love dancing to this. I get no kick from champagne. Beer alcohol doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why should it be true that I get a kick out of you? So I get a kick from cocaine. Back to the movies, and I Only Have Eyes from You Again. I mentioned Dubin and Warren, multiple Academy Award winners. This one didn't win an Academy Award, but I'll simply tell you, any movie that had Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler in it was going to get people's attention. So a movie came out in 1934 in which there was this song, and ironically, in the scene in the movie, Dick Powell and Ruby Keeler were not, I repeat, were not dancing. In the movie, they were leaning against the railing of the Staten Island Ferry, with the New York skyline lighted in the background. But as soon as this song came out in the movie, everybody started dancing to it. Oh boy, what a great one. Are the stars out tonight? Out for a minute. I see people's feet tapping. It works. It works. Will Hudson and Eddie DeLange co-led a dance band briefly together as friends. And then Eddie DeLange went on and continued with the dance band. But when they were together as co-leaders of the band, which was less common, actually, during the swing band era, they co-wrote with Irving Mills what would be their theme song. It was simply called Moonglow. It must have been moonglow, way up in the blue. It must have been moonglow, that led me straight to you. I still hear you saying, do you want to go with us? And I started praying, oh Lord, please let this last. We sing the glory through the air, heavenly songs seem to come from everywhere. Cut down with this moonlight, way up in the blue. I always remember that moonglow gave me you. Clearly, swing music, by whatever name you want to give it, dance band music, swing music, big band music, all of those work for me. That is an American invention, and we can be very proud of it. But by now, by the mid-1930s, not only were people swing dancing in America, they were swing dancing all over the world. People loved the music in Australia, they loved it in France, they loved it in England, and in England was a young man by the name of Ray Noble. He came to the United States. He couldn't bring his musicians in his band in England with him because our union musician rules wouldn't allow that, actually. Fair during the Depression, but he came and left England to come here. When he came here, he wanted to start a little band here, which he did. And he did it with the help of a young man that you didn't know in 1933. His name was Glenn Miller. Now, you get to know him a little bit later, partly because Glenn Miller worked with Ray Noble to form a pretty good little dance band. And people began to get to know the name Glenn Miller. Well, people also got to know the name Ray Noble. And after only 2 years with his American band that he made here, he got a job offer. Pretty nice one. The job offer came from Radio City Music Hall. And it was to be the musical director for Radio City Music Hall. So Ray Noble let the band go, and Glenn went on his way and became more famous in other ways. But his story can be saved for another day. Ray Noble was very gifted as a musician. Could compose music, could write lyrics, could handle arrangements. One of his classic songs is number 26 in your book, The Very Thought of You. The very thought of you, and I forget to do the little ordinary things that everyone ought to do. I'm living in the crime and daydream. I'm happy as a king, and foolish though it may seem to me, that's everything. The mere idea of you, longing here for you. You'll never know how slow the moments go till I'm near to you. I see your face in every flower, in eyes and stars and moon. It's just the thought of you, the very thought of you. I want. When we sang our polka, I mentioned Latin music, and it has to be represented at this time. I didn't want to put in too many songs. I do a whole program called Favorite Latin American Songs, and all the songs in that program are Latin. Someday I'll bring it for you. It's a really fun program. But this is one which is unique because Maria Graver was from Mexico. There's a really easy way, actually, musically, to describe Maria Graver. Maria Graver was to the country of Mexico what George Gershwin was to the United States. Same time, same kind of talents. phenomenal piano player, amazing composer, amazing gifts with music. She was so good at making Latin songs, American movie makers would contract her to write songs for our movies. And one of the great ones in 1934, What a Difference a Day Made. What a difference a day made, 24 little hours, from the sun and the flowers, where there used to be rain. My yesterday was blue here, today I'm part of you here. My lonely nights are through here, since you said you were mine. What a difference a day made. There's a rainbow before me, skies above could be stormy. Since that moment of bliss, that thrilling kiss, it's heaven when you find romance on me then you. What a difference a day made, and the difference is wonderful. Our final song is kind of interestingly different. Dietz and Schwartz, again, were not big name songwriters, but had a hit with this song in 1934. And it's kind of in a similar vein as what I said about that Cole Porter song that your parents tried to get banned from the radio. Your parents didn't want you listening to this one either. The idea of going out on a date and then spending an all-nighter with your date was beyond their comprehension. Right? I mean, in the 1930s, it was a little different than today. In the 1930s, I think you went out on a date, and I believe probably most of you went back to your home, and the significant other back to his or her home, right? Oh, at 11:30, I'm being told. Was anybody allowed later than 11:30? No. Was anybody earlier than 11:30? 10. Oh my gosh. I will politely and quietly tell you I have 2,700, give or take a few, former students. I'm in touch with many of them. I taught for 35 years, and most of that was high school. And I'm very proudly, I just went to a wedding of a former student 3 weeks ago. I'm very proudly going to another wedding in early October. And the wedding I'm going to in early October, my former student and his partner have been living together for 7 years. For 7 years I've been going to visit them and share time and say hi and have a bite to eat and whatever. Now they're finally deciding to get married. I don't know, I guess it was their decision to make, right? So again, back on topic here, I know it's a wonderful little song here, again, a little drama in this music, but your parents not wanting any part of this. You and the night and the music fill me with flaming desire, setting my being completely on fire. You and the night and the music fill me with will we be one. After the night and the music are gone, until the pale light of dawning the daylight, our hearts will be throbbing guitars. Morning may come without warning and take away the stars. If we must live for the moment, love till the moment is through. After the night and the music, I will die with you. Thank you. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, when I come, you know you're welcome to keep your copy of the booklet. If you'd like to have it, by all means, take it along with you and sing the songs over and over again. If you don't have a need for it, you can leave it on your chair. I'll see that it gets used up ahead somewhere. Bedroom. And again, in 38,